This episode brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Shifting a little money here, a little there, and hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can get a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help find you options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Spring is calling, weddings, patio sessions, barbecues, and you want that drink vibe without sacrificing tomorrow. That's RK Zero Proof. As the world's first zero proof spirits brand, RK created the warm molecule, giving you the smooth kick of whiskey or tequila with zero alcohol, 0 calories, 0 sugar, and all the peace of mind you need to enjoy every moment. Step into the zero proof season at rkzeroproof.com.
Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. As I like to point out each and every day, it expands our base. We won! That's what Pete Hegseth and General Kane said this morning. In fact, they refer to the war, which they believe is in the past. Yep, they talk about it in the past tense. But we know the war is not over. Quite the contrary. We know that there are serious issues that need to be addressed. And while there is talk of talks to take place on Friday, will those be direct talks between the United States and Iran? Let's be clear, there has been no regime change in Iran. The Ayatollah is still in charge. And we know clearly and precisely that Iran's capabilities militarily, while being somewhat diminished, still remain. How do we know? Well, they launched another missile attack against Israel just a few hours ago. We understand clearly that the question of nuclear materials is now a joint project, at least according to Hegseth. That is to say that the United States and Iran may jointly try to clean up what nuclear materials remain. And indeed, let's turn for a moment to the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz, according to Donald Trump, had to be opened completely. Well, we now know that under this ceasefire, that Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. Oh, yes, Pete Hegseth indicated this morning that we're going to hang around just to make sure that it's open. But in fact, let's be absolutely honest about it. We lost. We didn't win. And what does that mean? Well, it's true. We diminished Iran's nuclear capability, theoretically destroyed it. We eliminated their missile capability, theoretically destroyed it, although we know that isn't true because missiles are still flying. We know that the Strait of Hormuz is not open, but if it opens, it will be under Iranian control, not joint control. We know that the Iranians, in terms of where they are today, have been severely diminished, but in fact, so is the United States. So the question is, what happens next? Oh, by the way, did you note the Israelis, while agreeing to abide by a ceasefire, have not surrendered their right to respond to attacks? And I'm assuming that means in Iran as well as in Lebanon. Indeed, the Israelis have expanded their operations in Lebanon because Hezbollah is not part of this agreement. In other words, there are many, many unanswered questions. And despite Pete Hegseth and General Kane putting the war in the past tense, we know it really isn't past. We are still in the midst of trying to resolve what has happened. Now, the one thing I learned in all of this is that Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth and General Kane are claiming a victory which seems to me to be Pyrrhic at best. Iran's leadership remains in control of the country. And despite the president and Secretary Hegseth talking about regime change, we know, in fact, there has not been regime change. The Ayatollah's son is now, theoretically anyway, in command, and the Revolutionary Guard has not been decimated. They are still there. And so, what does it all mean? We have 2 weeks to find out. The United States reserves the right, if the ceasefire is violated, at least as we define the ceasefire, to go right in and do what we need to do. But let me ask you the blunt question. Do you believe the United States won a major victory? Let's be clear. Of course, militarily, we are way ahead of where Iran has been and will be. The United States is the most formidable military power in the world. By the way, that military power has been under every administration. There has not been a moment when American military power has truly been diminished. Let's be clear. Donald Trump can claim credit for this so-called victory, but in fact, it is a cumulative victory over many years in which the American military has been given the tools to do the job. And it didn't matter who was in office, a Democrat or a Republican. Every time Donald Trump says that he rebuilt the American military, I sort of lean back and chuckle, because we know that isn't true. No credible follower of what the American military has done over the last several decades will say in any way, shape, or form that Donald Trump is responsible for the strongest military in the world. Joe Biden gets some credit for that, no doubt about it, and so do all the preceding presidents. So what does it mean in terms of where we are in the world? The one thing that came out of this campaign, which disturbs me profoundly, is that the United States and Israel acting in partnership are no longer partners. The Israelis are going to respond as they see fit, which is the right of every nation. I always remember Menachem Begin once saying during the Reagan administration, "We are not a banana republic, we are not a vassal state," that Israel has the right to defend itself as every nation in the world should have. And so here we are. And there's another question which has been left, and I think a very serious one. Donald Trump, through all of these activities, has basically renounced NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the vital force in protecting the West for all these years. Donald Trump is moving to dismantle it. And the European leaders are being essentially told, whatever you do, do it on your own. And of course, we also know that Donald Trump has not focused at all on Ukraine and what has happened. In fact, he is still mouthing the words that the war in Ukraine was really started by Ukraine. And who is the big winner in all of this? Vladimir Putin. Putin continues his war in Ukraine with devastating effect, as we talked about yesterday. And Putin now, in terms of oil and control, has a greater stake than ever before in the world's oil business. There is something fundamentally wrong with the way American foreign policy is being made. Now, the Democrats have said they want Congress to come back into session in order to deal with the question of a president's war powers. Well, that's great, but the Democrats have no power. The Republicans still control the House and the Senate. And you will note that the seat held by Marjorie Taylor Greene was reinforced as a Republican seat in the special election held yesterday. Now, it doesn't mean that in November, when the election takes place, and in January, when a new Congress convenes, that there won't be a change. But it does mean that it is clear the Republicans are going to be passive. They are going to follow Donald Trump's lead because they really have no choice. The Republicans have tied their future success to Donald Trump and the Republican Party. It is clear that if they try to denounce Trump, well, they won't succeed. because Trump and the Republican Party are interchangeable now in terms of their policies. When it comes to foreign policy, let's be clear. Donald Trump has changed the dimensions of American involvement in the world. And the next president of the United States, whoever that may be, will have to rebuild the alliance that we have with NATO. Now, the Secretary General of NATO is supposed to meet today in the White House with the president to try to define the relationship between the United States and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I am anxiously awaiting the result of that meeting because NATO remains the cornerstone of American policy in terms of Europe. And Putin is watching very carefully. He will rejoice if NATO collapses. After all, that is his great nemesis, his belief that Soviet or Russian power was blocked by NATO and is being blocked by NATO to this very day. So, although our focus is on the question of Iran and the ceasefire, the real question may be the broader interpretation of American foreign policy. Let's also be clear that the domestic concerns remain real and vital. The question of the American elections that are just literally a few months away remain critical. Donald Trump is still trying to reshape that election in such a fashion that the Republicans will win. It is an unprecedented action by an American president to fiddle with the American political system. And there is reaction that is taking place from Democrats and Republicans. Remember, in Indiana, a solidly Republican state, that the Indiana Republican Party and legislature rejected the idea of redesigning the districts, gerrymandering the districts in Indiana. There is resistance in the Republican Party, and that resistance will be made more manifest as we approach November. Let me also indicate to you that we are still keeping our eye on the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court plays a central role in restricting the president's power. Will the Supreme Court do what it did in the tariff case and simply say to the president, what you are doing is not legal? And let me ask the more significant question. If we now know that what the president did was against the law, are there any implications for that? Now, there's no doubt about the fact that the Democrats would like to move to restrict the power of the president to make war. But we know that that is a futile action. It may be a significant gesture rhetorically, but it doesn't mean anything practically unless the Democrats have the votes. And let's remind all of us that if the Democrats were in the majority and there were a Democratic president, they would not be talking about restricting the powers of a president. In other words, foreign policy is now domestic policy. You know, Arthur Vandenberg, the former United States Senator from Michigan, who was really the articulator of the idea of bipartisanship in foreign policy, he said criticism of the president stops at the water's edge. He was talking about the Atlantic and the Pacific. That those days of bipartisan foreign policy seem to have faded. And now I want to ask the fundamental question: why? And the answer is because of Donald Trump. I don't think this is a Republican issue or a Democratic issue. I think it's a Donald Trump issue. Trump wants to centralize foreign policy in the White House. Now, you understand that I understand every president has tried to do just that. When Richard Nixon made Henry Kissinger national security advisor to the president, essentially bypassing the State Department, his design was that the president would articulate and create and implement foreign policy. We now have a situation where the current Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who you hear very little about these days, is also the national security advisor to the president. What does that really mean? It means that foreign policy is, in fact, in the hands of the White House, and that when serious errors are made or appear to have been made, the Democrats or the Republicans in Congress seem to have very little power to make a change. I point this out because the Iran situation is hardly over. There will be breaches of the ceasefire. There will be discussions about what Israel can and cannot do. But the bottom line is that the United States foreign policy is made directly by the president. And we have to deal with that as a nation. Part of what will take place in the midterm elections is this debate over foreign policy. And frankly, I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. You can write a review on Apple Podcasts, drop a comment on YouTube or Spotify, and click any of the links in the show notes to connect with me on social media. That applies particularly on Friday, which is fast approaching, with your questions. Please remember to share this episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand, which, of course, is our goal. This show has been getting so much positive attention that we are excited to bring on our advertising support. This will help us to create more opportunities for Around the Political World with John Rothman, and we're happy that that is happening. I want to say a special word of thanks to Gogo Soger, the wonderful producer of this podcast, who makes sure we are up and running every day. Thank you, Gogo. And to all of you, we'll watch the news today, we'll see where we stand, and of course, it's going to be exciting no matter what happens. And we'll be back here tomorrow with more of Around the Political World with John Rothman. See you then.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.